are going to further risk having some issues with your plants from a pest and disease control side. So, you know, does that create sustainability for our flower rooms? Perhaps. You know, we're using our rooms very efficiently. Um, Although some might question that the amount of space we have between our plants, is generous. But we think that again, it goes to the quality of the airflow. And so, setting our grow up to be a clean cannabis facility, in and of itself, created a sustainable cannabis growing facility, because we are looking at all of those other opportunities we have, whether it be our environmental resources. And something I haven't even touched on is also waste. We do not want waste around our plant products. We want to compost that waste whenever we can. And we've facilitated those relationships for recycling and for composting as much as we're able to.
I would think that
go ahead.
Composting, it seems like composting and using that on other crops like outdoor farming might be a really good idea because of the way it might restore some nutrients into soil.
100%. You feel the same way that many of the farmers we work with feel. We have farmers, we have local, smaller sustainable farms that pick up our soilless media and will compost and recycle that. We use very healthy, safe nutrients. And so because of our limited use of pesticides, and those that we do use are OMRI rated, I think that they feel very comfortable incorporating that into the composting in their agricultural and food.
Yeah, garden. And I've also heard that composted, just about any composted vegetable, but I would imagine especially cannabis, can be brewed into like a sun tea to create fungicide, herbicide, and pesticides as like a natural substance. Do you ever use that?
So we have in the past. I don't know that as of today. It might also be seasonally, just where our compost is in terms of its readiness. But there are teas. They are sold, from wholesalers, as well as people making them themselves, where they brew natural teas and then they act as both a nutrient and for plant pest health, or pest prevention, I should say.
Right. And let me ask you this, because I know that in order to declare that a food substance was grown organically, it has to go through all sorts of red tape with the FDA. And this is something I just don't know. When you're talking about organic farming of cannabis, obviously the DEA is not really 100% on board with the whole concept of it to begin with. How do you... Is there any kind of legal hoops you have to jump through in order to call your grow organic?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and you're 100% correct. If you've heard me use the term repeatedly in this conversation, clean cannabis, it's because I can't, per federal regulation, call my product organic. If there are any consumers out there and their dispensary is telling them that this product is organic, there really is no such thing at this time, because it's much in part due to my work that I do board service with Organic Cannabis Association. We are trying to create for consumers a way for them to recognize that differentiation. And right now there is no differentiation. Other than trusting your dispensary, there's no way that a consumer can substantiate that the claims that dispensary make are true and that it is meeting that standard. And USDA standard is for organic certification of plants and vegetables, items that we eat. And so cannabis is so challenging because it crosses both barriers of it is smoked, it is combusted, it is ingested as a food, it is used topically. It crosses all of these different avenues of ingestion and intake. So I'm very careful in our marketing materials to, I sort of skirt it. I say it, I allude to it, I talk about our organic best practice, but I try to be honest in that I don't have it on my sign because we can't. And I don't I try not to make that claim in our dispensary. We talk about clean cannabis, and that's really delivered pesticide-free. That is, it speaks to how it was cultivated, the ethics under which that plant was cultivated, from ethically with how are our workers in the back, and what pesticides are we expecting them to use, and the conditions that they work in, to our sustainability and how we are responsible. And we are certifiably green per the city of Denver, but they're only certifying our retail establishment, not the product inside our dispensary.
Right, and that's across the board in Colorado, isn't it? Not just Denver.
No, yeah, and it's just this constant clarification that we're forced to make because there isn't an option for us to make that distinction.
Right, right. I imagine that the FDA will ultimately catch up and start regulating cannabis cultivation the way that it does agricultural cultivation. The FDA and the USDA probably as well. I mean, do they ever get involved?
No, they do not. USDA does not get involved. The EPA tries to leave that to the local Department of Ags, and they do not involve themselves. I think they're educated to some of what is going on. I think that more than just you and I, there are a lot of people out there, including people within the government, that would like more research done and to open this up. But I think that there's also the other end of that spectrum. So we have to be very positive that this industry is going to continue with its progress as it has for the past few years, and not backslide due to changes in administration.
Yeah. Well, one would hope anyway.
One would hope.
Yeah. So, do you use hydroponic agriculture techniques? No. What would be the difference for someone? Let's say, because we hear a lot about hydroponic cannabis grows. What do you think is really the difference between that and growing in traditional soil settings?
I am not an expert and would not even begin to know how to flush that question out and not be the object of ridicule to people who are experts in those fields. I think there is room for hydroponics. There is room. We use a soilless media, a peat and cocoa core mix at Legal. But I really can't speak to the different grow methods. And this is a great opportunity for me to point out that, as owners, we have always employed experts in our grow, not experts in growing cannabis in their basements, but experts in agriculture, experts in organic farming, experts in agricultural, finance and efficiency. We've always sought out directors of cultivation and cultivation leads that hold those degrees, because if there's anything we've learned, it's hire the right people and rely on people who know more about you in that field. So I would have to sort of hand that question off to somebody who worked directly with hydroponics.
Yeah, well, I think that's it's awesome that you're doing that, because I know that there have been some people who have transitioned from the underground growing, if you will, into the light in legal cultivation. And I think that there's really nothing more important, especially when you're dealing with growing medicine for people, than to employ people who have been formally educated in certain techniques and really know the distinction between good practices and not so good practices that could potentially be harmful to people.
Yeah, I would agree. I think from a sustainability standpoint and from a health, standpoint, that when it is a lot easier for us to teach cannabis, the plant, to a scientist or to someone who has an agricultural degree than it is to teach science and agriculture to someone who understands a cannabis plant. I just don't think they are reciprocated as easily in both directions. So, yes, experts, absolutely.
Yeah, no,
a lot of time and money.
Yeah, I can imagine it would. It would definitely pay off, I would think. So, explain a little bit about the strains and how easily the cannabis plant can mutate from one strain to another, because I think a lot of people don't really understand what all of these different strains, how they come to be, and there's a lot of talk about genetically modifying plants, and I think that splitting strains and mutating them into other strains that have different potency ranges of the cannabinoids that are in those plants is quite different than genetically modifying to accept Roundup, for example, pesticides and herbicides and that sort of thing. Can you explain what that process might look like for someone who might not know?
We grow in-house about 35 different strains. They all have a very distinct cannabinoid profile. That means it goes further than just THC potency, right? Then they also have CBD, CBN, THCV, THC, and so those profiles look very differently, whether they're sativa and indica or a hybrid as well. On top of that, they have terpenes, and you hear a lot about the terpene profile and the full entourage effect of the terpenes and how they interact with the cannabinoids, and then how that affects the THC and your high. And each strain is going to create a different high for you. We really try to preserve the integrity of these strains. We don't want them to mutate. When strains go, hermaphrodite or they start to change, that's usually due to a stress in the growing environment. And so we do everything we can to mitigate that. We don't want them to change. And we want to preserve the integrity of that strain's genetic profile, and be able to reproduce that by cloning the mother and continuing to have that flowering cycle. But as far as bringing in new strains, we do it, and it's a challenge because you never know. If it's you're popping seeds, are they female or male? And so it happens, and we probably bring on a couple of strains per year, but we really don't try to revolve them out or change them that often. We like consistency, so that we know, we can make some predictions as to what we're growing and how to do the integrated pest management, and, pairing it up. What room are we growing it, and what other plants are we growing it with? And plants have the ability to talk to one another and communicate, and you want to keep that consistency as much as you can. We want to meet consumer demand, and we want to bring in new strains, but we're very, very judicious about how we go through that cycle and when we're ready to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting how you're able to keep them from cross-pollinating. I've heard a lot about, I've done a lot of research on the genetically modified crops, and I'm not an advocate of those, corn and soy and cotton and so on. But, I've read a lot about organic farmers neighboring big agricultural grows, and just the mere fact that a bee will be taking pollen from one crop and go over to another person's property and pollinate that crop, and that crop winds up with the DNA of the genetically modified version. Is it the same kind of thing with cannabis, or is that...
Not when you're growing indoors. That's another reason that our indoor environment and a controlled environment is so important.
Right.
We don't have pollinators flying around in our space. We also don't have drift from somebody using, down the road a banned substance or a toxic pesticide that's going to end up on ours residually. So, it's just another reason to the controlled environment, I think, is very important for cannabis. Perhaps with hemp and some of these, depending on what you're growing for, I could see where outdoor is a benefit, but I think that it poses a new challenge.
Yeah, I imagine. I mean, these are all things that I've wondered over the last few years, and so I'm really happy to be learning from you. There's just so much to it. It's mind-boggling.
And this is a great chance for me to plug the Cannabis Sustainability Symposium. If people are interested in cannabis sustainability and they really want to see